Good morning, St. Matthew UCC. I bring you grace and peace from First Church Berkeley UCC on the left coast. I'm not sure which way west is. And I'm so grateful to Erin for inviting me to Wheaton to spend time with y'all. We've been eating our way through your delicious town and walking the prairie path to get ready for our next culinary adventure and talking a mile a minute the whole time. On Friday, I got the grand tour of your church and could feel your warmth and your welcome, even though the building was empty then. And it's even better now that I can see your faces. I've known Erin for about 5 years. I think it's like almost our anniversary, actually. We became friends in a way I wouldn't normally recommend. You see, she wrote the most marvelous mini sermons on Facebook, and whenever I found myself at a loss for words about some important political or social issue, I would just share Erin's. And then I noticed this other woman pastor named Heather, also brilliant and very funny, commenting on Erin's stuff. And we all started commenting on each other's stuff like mad, and then we shyly asked for each other's phone numbers so we could text directly without Mark Zuckerberg eavesdropping. And then I did something either really brave or really stupid. I invited them to fly to my home for a retreat. I mean, yes, they were women and UCC pastors, so very unlikely to be serial killers, but it's always the ones you least expect. Long story short, they didn't kill me, and we didn't stop talking for 48 hours, and that was 5 years ago. And since then, in person and by Zoom and text, we have seen each other through professional setbacks and heartache, through global pandemics and parenting struggles and church fights, through big transitions and long, deliciously boring seasons when nothing too bad happened. And because of our first initials, Molly, Erin, Heather, we jokingly call ourselves meh. But our time together is anything but. These women are a gift from God to me and to the Big C Church, because they have given me courage to keep going and insight in what to do next when I run out of patience or ideas as a 30-year veteran in parish ministry. Because it's not easy. Sometimes I feel like we women clergy were finally given the keys to the kingdom just as the party was ending. You know what I'm talking about? I'm sure ministry's never been easy, but since about 5 minutes after we graduated from seminary, the entire conversation about church seems to be about fighting a long, slow decline and losing. I look at your church and I feel hope. Erin talks about your energy for innovating, how dear you all are. I see the fruits of your labors in new signage and new paint and spaces that are clean and cared for and ready for newcomers. But I wonder if sometimes you also worry that even with will and willingness, that all you hold dear could melt away. Of course you worry. We all worry. Nehemiah knew this worry. He didn't grow up in Jerusalem, as we learned. He was one of the generations of Israelites born after the Babylonian exile forced most of his ancestors to go and live in Persia. But he felt a kinship with his cousins back in Jerusalem. He personally was in a really good situation. He had a secure job in the palace of King Artaxerxes, the king's personal cupbearer, no less. But something wouldn't let him stay comfortable. Once he heard from mutual friends how things were back home in Jerusalem. They were a mess. The walls fallen down, the gates burned, the people living in trouble and shame. His people. It got into his head and his heart. He cried for days and he couldn't stop thinking about it. And the next time he brought wine to the king, wonder of wonders, the king noticed. Here's a couple verses from just before what Don read for us. This is my favorite part of the story. The emperor of basically most of human civilization then looks at his servant and says, "Why is your face sad? Since you are not sick, this can only be a sadness of the heart. The king noticed. And Nehemiah is given a choice. He can play it safe, he can make excuses, he can stuff his feelings away, he can go on with business as usual and benefit himself, or he can take a risk. The scripture says he prays, and then with his knees knocking, just like one of our little boys this morning, he tells the king the truth. His ancestral city lies in ruins. His people are in distress. And the king says, "How can I help?" And Nehemiah takes his moment. "If you give me leave to go and letters for safe passage through the neighboring provinces and some free lumber, I'd like to go help." So much of what God can do in us and through us doesn't begin with a clear 5-point plan. It begins, as Nia reminded us, with prayer, with tears, with fear and trembling, and even with sadness, but a sadness that doesn't get stuck inside of us, a sadness that becomes activated as fierce compassion, a sadness that becomes willing to do something, to risk something. I know this fear and trembling, this sadness, and so do the people of my church. 8 years ago today, which also happened to be my 5-month anniversary as their new senior minister, a significant portion of my church burned down. The blaze started as a little chimney fire, but took out the building housing our offices, Sunday school, meeting rooms, kitchen, archives, and our fellowship hall. Then it spread to the roof of our historic sanctuary, which was only saved by the Herculean efforts of the Berkeley Fire Department, pouring water into it for hours. I wasn't at the church when the fire started, but rushed right over and walking up the street, mouth agape at the flames shooting stories into the sky, I felt overwhelmed. And I hope my congregation wasn't remembering one of the first sermons I preached for them when I said that God sometimes set fires to burn away what doesn't serve and make space for new growth. Metaphorically, gulp. We were burned out of the sanctuary for 10 months. We were burned out of the building for 8 years. When we moved back into the sanctuary at 10 months, we repurposed every nook and closet so we could keep functioning as a church while we rebuilt the program building. I knew that would be a lot of work, and I'm grateful that God 8 years ago shielded me from knowing just how much work it would be. Or I might have given up and found a cushier job. Wine bearer to the king sounds great. God doesn't always show us the whole future all at once. For just this reason, we might get scared and give up. I'm happy to talk to any of you after church about all the gory details of rebuilding, but right now I'll just give you a little highlight reel, which may be familiar to some of you who read my most recent book, How to Begin When Your World is Ending, especially the second to last chapter called Church on Fire, literally and metaphorically. You see, first we had to fight our insurance company to pay us everything we were owed. Then we tangled with each other about everything from design to cost to scope and purpose. Should we tear down the smoking carcass or try to salvage it? In rebuilding, could we put up affordable housing as well, which seemed like the holiest and highest use for this real estate to some of us in a region experiencing a devastating housing crisis? Should we build to the limits of our insurance proceeds or have a capital campaign? And most importantly, should the new walls be white or cream, flat or eggshell or semi-gloss? To my chagrin, I became a scapegoat during some of our worst church infighting. A mutual friend of Aaron's and mine, the former minister of Cathedral of Hope, senior minister of Cathedral of Hope, told me, "I've never known a woman to survive a church building campaign." He's no longer a friend of mine. Just kidding. We fought the city for permits. We fought pandemic supply chain issues. We had no king to notice our sadness and provide us with free lumber and safe passage. But we weren't without help. In fact, the struggles themselves in many ways saved our church. You see, when I arrived, my beloved congregation was a little complacent. For decades, they had enjoyed a good reputation as the big and wealthy and healthy UCC in our region, but there were little signs of distress that with my newcomer eyes, I noticed. They were relying a little too heavily on staff instead of taking up ministry themselves. They were relying on a few quite generous and quite elderly givers instead of everyone being a stakeholder. And they had more than a little idolatry of their beautiful building and the good they had done in the past. They were really genuinely kind, but not truly skilled at befriending new people and helping them find a place in the community. And I saw an opportunity. When I arrived, there's a little bit of an attitude of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, something was very clearly broken now, and broken open. We were Nehemiah and the faithful remnant who had stayed in Jerusalem surveying the wreckage. Rebuilding would require all of us, and it would show us what we were capable of. I want to tell you what happened to Nehemiah after the part Don read for us, a little peek into their future. Nehemiah didn't tell the people of Jerusalem at first what he was working on. He needed to make some assessments first, but when he laid out the vision before them, these defeated people, they caught it. They held it. They had a leader who could see the next right thing to do, and they trusted him, and they were buoyed by this startup support from the king, and what happened after that was beautiful. Everyone in Jerusalem helped rebuild. Each family or tribe took a section of the wall, and even though in their everyday lives they were working as jewelers or perfumers or priests, they all helped as laborers. Nehemiah names them all, cast of thousands. He even included the women who helped, women leaders who survived a building campaign. Take that, Michael Piazza. My congregation and our own rebuilding efforts eventually resolved most of our fights through determination and Olympic levels of patience and a willing to learn how to communicate in more healthy ways and a commitment not to let a couple of angry people derail the vision. We decided to put up a building half the size of our previous one, but one that would be up to code, fully accessible, and much more energy efficient. And we voted to build affordable housing on the other end of our campus, in the parking lot. And I didn't get fired. The city approved our plans. We built to our budget. Well, we planned to our budget, the $10 million we had finally wrangled from the insurance company. And then the last struggle landed. COVID inflation suddenly added 20% to the cost of our building between the permitting stage and the start of construction. $2 million we didn't have. We could figure out how to cut about $1 million out of the budget with austerity measures, but we would still have to have a capital campaign. Would the people step up, so close to the end of the pandemic, take responsibility, dig deep? The first giving testimony of our campaign came from Becky Smith, one of the longtime leaders of the church and one of the most faithful Christians I've ever known. She couldn't deliver it in person because she was at the Mayo Clinic for cancer treatment, a cancer that would likely kill her. And in a video she sent that we all watched, she told us that she was pledging $100,000 out of her retirement funds to support the rebuilding efforts. I guess we did have a king. Many kings, as it turned out. Becky's generosity chased away our fear and our sadness. A grateful 13-year-old in our congregation pledged 2 months of her babysitting earnings. And after that, everyone followed suit. Everyone did what they could and more than they thought they could. We raised $1.8 million. We'll move into our beautiful new building just after Christmas. I can't wait to dance in the doors with my people. Even better, I can't wait to throw the doors wide and welcome all kinds of people who need its shelter, because we're not just rebuilding for ourselves. We're rebuilding for all the people who will use that sacred space for good. People of all faiths and no faith, all of them God's children, and all of them our neighbors. The last 2 lines of today's reading is a spell that works sacred magic. It dispels fear. It gives us Olympic patience. It helps us work through every conflict with humility and humor. Those lines from Nehemiah are, "Then the people said, 'Let us start building.' So they committed themselves to the common good." Church, next time you're sad or afraid or fighting, next time you're feeling overwhelmed by defeat or think you're not up to the task, stop. Pray. Think of me in Berkeley praying for you, because I will. Ask for the help you need. Trust your Nehemiahs. Trust that God has given you all collectively what you need to make a big and beautiful thing happen. Commit yourselves to the common good, then start building. Amen? Amen. Amen.